Yes, no. Pat's on.
Yeah.
Hi, Pat.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm not good. Dick wanted to know if we were the only ones on or something. I said, no.
Okay, do any of y'all know what to do when a pipe freezes and water starts gushing?
Oh my God.
It happened to Andrew just now.
This is why you leave your tap running when it's cold.
It sounds like the pipe burst.
It did. He's got water running all over the back.
Oh my God.
So the short answer is no.
Call a plumber.
Yeah, call a plumber.
Because the damage has been done. I mean, there's nothing he could do about it now.
Yeah.
It's awful. I'm having a man come out and remove the snow from my roof tomorrow because I'm afraid of roof collapse.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness. Is yours a flat roof?
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of quite a few buildings in the city that have had
Yes.
roof collapsing because of the weight of the snow.
My Lord.
Okay. Now that most of us are here, we'll go ahead and begin with prayer. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places, filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Truth.
Amen.
Apropos to our talk today.
Yes.
So while we wait for Steve to kind of log in and see if Dr. Ed is able to join us as well, but while we're waiting on them, and we won't worry about Dr. Tobias because he's dealing with his son's broken water main.
Oh boy.
Mrs. Tobias, what did you find particular interesting about the step 11 on talkativeness and silence?
That we should always, personally think before you open your mouth, and remove all, what's the saying? Remove all,
Let them think you're a fool and
yeah.
open your mouth.
Yeah. Don't open your mouth to prove you're a fool, But then what got me a little confused too, there's somewhere, I think this is the one where they said, well, sometimes it's okay to say stuff.
Well, that's in lying, and we'll get to that. That's in step 12.
Wrong place. Okay.
Right. So this one is basically about talking. And the one thing I will say before we go to Pat next is the reason why you'll sometimes see Orthodox Christians or monastics, they will sometimes cross their mouth, not when they yawn, but before they say something. The idea basically, protect me from what I'm about to say, so that I don't get in the way. And there's a lot to say about this, but we'll get to that after we hear kind of the overviews and then the parts that people found to be particularly interesting. Pat?
Well, first of all, being a quiet person myself, talkativeness is a quality that I don't enjoy in another person. But it reminds me of a quote by Ben Franklin. He says, "Here comes the orator with a flood of words and a drop of reason."
It's definitely, we're seeing a theme here of individuals proving their lack of wisdom when they speak.
Right. But I thought I was really taken by the contrast that he sets up between numbers 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Talkativeness is a sign of ignorance, among other things, and then contrasting it with in 3, deliberate silence, the mother of prayer, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really, really profound.
We'll go into more depth in that when we go into looking at the individual pieces. Steve?
Well, I've been known to be a talkative person, so I should be quiet. But then it goes on to say that it also equates it to jesting, and I've been known to tell some pretty bad jokes. So it's something I need to pay attention to.
Well, some people have the gift of gab. Okay. So while we're on you, Steve, which one of these did you find kind of interesting?
Okay. You want me to? I have a whole paragraph here from Patrick Michael. If you want me to read that.
Yeah, let's do him first. I was going to do him at the end, but let's do him first.
My thoughts begin with step 11 and the words of St. John. Talkativeness is a sign of ignorance. Deliberate silence is the mother of prayer. Our Lord is recorded in St. Luke 6:45. For out of the abundance of the heart of the mouth speaks. Therefore, how do we control our tongue? How do we defend ourselves in the face of adversity without the use of words? Christ stood silent before Pilate, and when he did speak, he repeated the words that Pilate used. Archimandrite Basilios writes that when we are spiritually lazy, we try to fill the vacuum with pointless chattering. Together with words of our Lord, every idle word men speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. And that's from St. Matthew 12:36. And I wonder why I even speak at all. As a people person, I enjoy talking to and visiting with others, but not all conversations turn out the way that I'd like them to. My speech has not always been with the intent of saving souls. I must tame my tongue because it gets me into trouble, and with the same tongue that I praise God, I slander my neighbor. To tame the tongue will be a challenge, but when it happens, it will cut off many evils. So I think that's an interesting thing that he says here is, as you know, let's keep in mind that the tongue we use to speak and maybe slander other people and say nonsense is the same tongue that we use to praise God.
Exactly. And that's the thing is that what we don't understand is that our tongue is a double-edged sword. It is extremely powerful to do good and to do evil. And we've seen some incredible things of certain saints where they didn't answer a word. We'll talk more about that in a moment.
But to get into the which particular hold on a second, I lost my place. Okay. Okay. In number 8, at the end of it, he says that garrulity comes especially from vainglory and sometimes also from gluttony.
Mm-hmm.
That is why many who bridle the stomach by force afterwards easily check the tongue and its chatter.
That's very, very apropos because gluttony is also another way of looking at the sin of gluttony is incontinence, which is lack of control. And so the idea is that, and this is where you've perhaps heard the expression vomit of the mouth.
Yeah.
Because you don't have control of what you are spewing. It just comes out of you. And by not checking the gates, by not having a guard on what you are saying, set a guard, O Lord, upon my lips, as the psalmist says. By not doing that, we allow ourselves to be akratia, to be incontinent, and to have our words just come right out of us. And that's one of the reasons, again, why it's so critical, why gluttony, controlling our stomach, is the first step in spiritual warfare, because if you can say no to food, then you're more apt to be able to say no to other things. It's about building on self-control. And the other thing about talkativeness and vainglory is very, very important. I shared with you once before when I was in a group with priests teaching children, and I was trying to get my words in. And so one of my brother priests said to me, you know, Father Dimitri, he said this to me privately, he did not say this to me in front of the children. Do you speak because you have something to add or because you need to be heard? And it's a very probing question that say, what is the intention as to why I'm speaking? What am I trying to say? And the letter that we read earlier really harkens to that, to say, why am I saying what I'm saying? Now, I'm not at the point of saying, well, everything we say needs to save souls. But is what I'm saying edifying? Is it lovely? Is it good? Is it bringing myself and others to higher heights of glory? Or is it meant to make me look smart? Is it make me to people go,
Right.
wow, isn't he clever?
Yeah.
What is the reason I'm saying what I'm saying? Is it for glory? Is it for lack of self-control? This is something that is very, very powerful. And there's much to say about this section. Pat? Which one did
Again, you know, it reminds me of a line in the prayer of Saint Ephrem, asking God to keep me from idle chatter.
mm-hmm.
Right.
From idle talk? And
Yeah.
that's, you know, the idea idle hands are the devil's playthings. It's even
Yeah.
worse with a mouth,
Yeah.
an idle mouth. Now, you had kind of approached points 2 and 3 as very, very powerful, in which that they basically look at the heart of each one, the virtue and the vice, looking at talkativeness as the throne of vainglory, of which it loves to show itself and make a display. Talkativeness is a sign of ignorance, a door to slander, a guide to jesting, a servant of falsehood, the ruin of compunction, a creator of despondency, precursor of sleep, the dissipation of recollection, the abolition of watchfulness, the cooling of ardor, and the darkening of prayer. Talkativeness is enemy number one for any kind of glorious pursuit. Contrasting that with its opposite, deliberate silence is the mother of prayer, a recall from captivity, preservation of fire, a supervisor of thoughts, a watch against enemies, a prison of mourning, a friend of tears, effective remembrance of death, a depictor of punishment, a meddler with judgment, an aid to anguish, an enemy of freedom of speech, a companion of quiet, an opponent of desire to teach, increase of knowledge, a creator of contemplation, unseen progress, secret ascent. It is beyond powerful.
Yeah.
I love that. The feeling is like, well,
Yeah.
teach. Why do you need to teach? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you saying, well, I'm going to teach them a lesson? Okay, to what end? And this is why when we look to some of these things, it's like, okay, yes, you can talk once you've acquired humility and are able to actually do it well. Now, one of the greatest examples of silence that I can think of is the story and the winsomeness of Saint Theodora. You all know her story?
No.
No.
So, Saint Theodora, her father wanted to marry her to a nice man. She, however, wanted to be a nun. That was what she wanted more than anything. And it wasn't like the man was a bad man. It wasn't like he was going to be abusive. She just wanted to be a nun more than anything. So she knew if she was to become a nun, they would find her and bring her back. So what did she do? She disguised herself as a man and joined a monastery. And so she lived her life as a young monk with a problem. So what makes it interesting was a couple of years after her tonsure as a monk, she was tasked by a merchant who asked a favor of the abbot of the monastery to escort his daughter from one city to another city. And the father of the daughter wanted a monk to be the escort so that his daughter would not be defiled, because she was very beautiful. And so on the journey, the daughter was taken by Theodore's beauty.
Oh, no.
Wanted to have Theodore sleep with her. And of course, Theodore said, absolutely not. I've been tasked to protect you, bring you from one place to the other place. Well, the girl got upset, spurned, and so she went and slept with someone else. 9 months later, she shows up at the monastery with a baby and says,
Oh, no.
Mm.
and now obviously it's not Theodore's. And Theodora could have turned it down right then and said, yeah, that's not true. It's not possible. She takes the child, raises the child. The child eventually becomes a monk himself.
Oh, my God.
Later in her life, she encounters her husband and her father who have been searching for years for her. And so they decided to step in a monastery for prayer. They don't recognize her because after years and years of fasting, she doesn't look like herself anymore. And she convinces them and says, look, Theodora is dead, which is not a lie because when you become a monk, your old self is dead. Your daughter is dead. You might as well come and rest in prayer here at the monastery. And as it happened, the two cells on either side of her were open, so her father and her husband ended up being in the two cells. Now, she died young. And there had been basically a stigma about her throughout the monastery. Oh, yeah, Theodore's an okay monk, but he sowed his wild oats when he was younger. He's not the best monk, if you know what I mean. He looks pious, but underneath he's a sinner. Well, as they're preparing Theodore's body for burial, they discover the truth. And they recognize the amount of silence that Theodora needed to hold on to not say anything, to not prove her innocence,
Wow.
and show her great holiness. And then as in her death, she showed herself to be this mega saint that the rest of the monastery just started wailing in tears. They realized, we were around this saint. We thought that this was a sinner, and this person turned out to be a spiritual giant. Absolutely incredible.
Very heavy.
Mrs. Tobias?
Yes, I was going to say on the sentence, after following what we just said, I felt like 6, the silence of Jesus put Pilate to shame, and by man's stillness, vainglory is vanquished, is very true. Because, I also, even today, have a tendency to want to defend yourself. No, that's not true. Or no, and that's a very hard thing to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's the big thing, is to ask yourself, why? Why is it so important that my honor be defended? Well, the reality is that if your honor is good, it's going to be self-evident. Truth comes out. The more and more you protest, the more and more you seem less. Dr. Tobias?
Well, being one who is more simple-minded, I always choose the shortest ones. Well, 4, 5, and also 12 were the ones that
4 is a good one. He who has become aware of his sins has controlled his tongue, but a talkative person has not yet got to know himself as he should. And that's the reality, is that when you're talking, you're not aware of just what you don't know about yourself, your sins. Because when we're talking, oftentimes we're talking about other people. And because we're talking about other people's, we are judging them.
Right.
12. Few can hold water without a sluice. Still fewer can tame an intemperate mouth. It's true. It's so true.
And then below it, the 11th step, he who has mastered it has cut off at one blow a multitude of evils.
It's true. Dr. X?
I'm late, so I'm not sure exactly what's been gone over, but, number 8, I thought was interesting the way he starts it for this being talkative. He says, I do not wish to write much about this, even though the wiles of the passion urge me to do so. So he's like,
You almost have
Just
to pause, like, I see what you did there. Very, very good, St. John. Very good.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, we all have to, certainly we have to find that balance in our lives of when it's appropriate to actually speak.
Absolutely, and that's the element here is that earlier Steve read a letter from the inmate in which he said that I really shouldn't be talking at all, and so the question then becomes, okay, when do you talk? And that's the idea, is that you do so with temperance. Once you have gotten rid of these things, then you can do these things. Once you've conquered vainglory, then you can do these things. So until you've conquered them, keep your mouth shut because you're more likely to do harm. I mean, the reality is that by talking, it's like throwing live hand grenades at people that we're not even aware of when we are not paying attention. The reason why this is so dangerous is because what people don't seem to get is that our talking is not often our own. How many times have you been talking and then out of nowhere a thought comes to you and you immediately say it? And immediately after you say it, you have instant regret and you think to yourself, I don't really think that. Why did I say that? Meanwhile, the other person is harmed beyond measure. They are so wounded by what you said. Now, why do you think that happens?
Well, are you talking to all of us?
Yeah.
I would think because the evil one puts that through our mind, and we're, and we're
In other
not
words,
thinking.
it's almost like a lobby in tennis. He threw up a ball, and you, without even thinking, spiked it. And that's why this impertinence, this intemperance of our mouth, that's what leads to these damaging moments, and why it's so critical to be silent, to wait. Don't just react. And by that, you also have to try to understand that that's not just reacting with your mouth, but also with your inner mouth. Because what sometimes happens is we're not speaking, but we're saying loads inside our mind.
Well, yes. And it's not enough just to not speak. Like, I think that talkativeness leads to a breakdown in communication very often because you're talking, and you're not listening to what the other person is saying. Or if you are quiet for a minute, you're only thinking of the next thing that you want to say and when you want to jump in and just not listening to what's actually being said to you.
I want to really focus on what you just said, Pat, because that is such a critical element. Is that so many times in both arguments and even with just talkativeness that proves that we're fools, is that instead of listening to what the person had to say, we're already preparing the next thing we're going to say
Right,
instead of actually reflecting on what that person said.
right.
That's good.
Very, very good. So let's go into one of the children of talkativeness, step 12 on lying. Go ahead and hear from our brother first in his letter, and then we'll get to broad strokes from everyone else.
Steve, are you going to read Patrick Michael?
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a second, what did I do?
He says,
Yeah.
because the offspring of chatter and joking is lying, St. John is critical of uncontrollable laughter because it causes us to become distracted and neglect our prayers. But if a drunk man tells no lies, then he who is filled with the Spirit should also be unable to tell a lie. A lie is the destruction of love, and perjury is the denial of God. That's a quote. However, St. John writes that some lie to escape punishment, some lie just because they like it. However, there are two instances in the Old Testament where our people lied, and in recent times the same in order to save lives. I'm not sure what he means there.
He's quoting this section what St. John is talking about, where we think that we're like Rahab from the Old Testament.
Who is Rahab? I wanted to ask you that.
She was one of the people that let them in at the what's it called? Where she let the spies in, and
Uh-huh.
and then hung a thing, basically lying, saying that they weren't there,
Oh,
where it was quote unquote a lie, but it accomplished the good.
I see.
But that's the problem, is that oftentimes we think that we're lying for the good and for the help of another person, when we don't really realize is that we are actually hurting people. So let's go ahead and go with broad strokes. Dr. Ed, we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. This one kind of gave me the most food for thought of these three sections. And what I was thinking about, he ties the lying to hypocrisy, sort of this play acting or building yourself up or putting on a face for other things. And I was actually listening to a podcast about an author who was a bit of a fantasist. Like he was in the Air Force in World War I, but he saw no action. And then when he came back, he had a cane and he was walking around pretending that he had been wounded in the war. And he kept this up for many years. And I've been thinking about, it wasn't apparent whether he actually believed this was the case anymore or whether he was even lying. And I thought about, how sometimes we tell ourselves stories so much that, we don't even remember, oh, was I there or not? Or do I just remember this person telling the story so much?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thinking, that idea of hypocrisy and, creating this story about yourself, it kind of got me thinking about how we curate an online, presence, or how we want to present ourselves to different people. And it's not really a true representation of ourselves. And there's this really famous saying by Metropolitan Anthony Bloom that I see all the time. It's like, God can save the sinner that you are, but not the saint that you pretend to be.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking of.
It's very, very powerful. And it kind of reminds me of that, I don't know if you've seen the meme Facebook reality. They show a picture of a kitchen, just a corner of a countertop that looks immaculate. It's a beautiful countertop with beautiful cabinets behind it. And they say that this is Facebook reality, where they're presenting just this little itty bitty spot. And then it says actual reality, it pans back, and there's like pasta on the ceiling and pasta everywhere. And, because we're looking at this lie, this hypocrisy, that people are promulgating as my real life, when it's not your real life. It's something that you have basically lied about to try to make yourself seem that you're something that you're not.
And sometimes we start to believe our own lie.
Exactly.
Say it often enough.
So let's continue on with you, Pat. I guess Steve, when his connection comes back.
Yes, I liked 8 and 9 sort of taken together. They're like reasons for lying. Some more valid maybe than others. You lie through fear of punishment. Okay, well, that's understandable. But then another man lies when there's no danger at hand. In other words, just for the sake of lying or for self-aggrandizement.
Mm-hmm.
So
notice how he's zeroing in on intent, that the sin itself is dangerous. It is hurtful in and of itself. I mean, yes, it can, for certain things, be used to help, but that's so rare and so calculated that we have to be careful as to why we're doing it. And so the idea of fear of punishment versus, I'm just a pathological liar.
Right.
And why are you a pathological liar? Wantonness, amusement, to see how people are going to react, to make bystanders laugh. But the most dangerous, of course, to trap a brother and do him injury.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, for number 9, some are, more harmless reasons for lying, maybe to amuse the other person. You tell a little lie or an exaggeration. But to trap your brother and do him injury is a much more sinister reason.
They're all problematic, but yes, there are darker tones to this.
Right. So I like the nuance in that.
Dr. Tobias?
And being a simple person, I liked 7 and 13.
All right, 7. He who has obtained the fear of the Lord has forsaken lying, having within himself an incorruptible judge, his own conscience.
Yeah.
And this is basically at the heart of the Metropolitan's quote that Dr. Ed put, which is basically, if you are aware of what you are and who you are, to basically say, I'm not going to lie. And that's really the essence of humility. What is humility? Humility isn't self-abasement, it's self-knowledge. To know who and what you are, to say, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to present myself as something that I'm not.
It also,
And number 13, a babe knows nothing of lying, neither does a soul that is stripped of evil.
I also had a thought of something. Well, my father taught me that your word is your bond. Period. People judge you by your word. No lies, only truth. That you're a man of honor.
So let's take that a step back and let's look at the Saint Theodora. Because in her life, she didn't, I mean, technically, if we're looking at this, technically she was lying because she was presenting herself as something else. But when it came time for her to be able to justify her, to have her honor, as it were, the question then becomes, and this is where it's so important to understand, who are you being honest to? God or your fellow man? To understand, to be honest with God, to basically know who and what you are, that is the highest degree of honor and honesty. To be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I am honest. Because ultimately, the reality is, and I know this is hard, this comes back to the talkativeness, the idea of talkativeness trying to basically have vainglory, is to say, if someone tells a lie about you, and you have been honorable, and you have been honest, and you did not lie, but the lie gets believed anyway, gets spread, are you somehow less honorable?
For not defending yourself, you mean?
Right.
No.
If you know you are honorable, and you know that you can look yourself in the mirror, your quality is seen in the honesty with God.
Right.
And that's why it was so important, which is why you say, he who has obtained the fear of the Lord has forsaken lie. Excuse me, I'm reading the wrong one. Which was the first one you had, Dr. Tobias?
Was it 7?
He who has obtained the fear of the Lord has forsaken lies,
That's it.
having within himself an incorruptible judge, his own conscience.
And this is one of the things where it kind of gets to what Pat was talking about earlier too, which is the idea that you've told the lie so much that you're fooling yourself. Whereas if you fear the Lord and his righteous judgment, then the judge, which is your conscience, there is no ambiguity there. Mrs. Tobias?
Of course, he took 8, which not 8, 13, which I liked, but I also liked 14, because in our youth, hopefully just our youth and not now, he who has become merry with wine involuntarily speaks the truth on all subjects. And you've probably witnessed this, all of us.
In vino veritas.
And he who knows much and cannot lie. So I like
Yeah, I
the
love
way that
that.
was worded.
Exactly. What are you trying to get drunk on? Are you trying to get drunk on wine, which will lead to lack of self-control, versus drunk on compunction, self-control? And if you are that, rock hard on that, of course you cannot lie. I guess we'll get to Steve when he comes back. Dr. Ed, did you have one that you liked? Because I know you said there was a lot of meat here, so I'm sure there's a couple.
Yeah, there were many here. Let me. Yeah, I guess we've covered the ones that I had highlighted and, you know, kind of thought about the most. I mean, the one that was kind of jumped out as just kind of strange, and maybe you can remark on, was about, I'm certain that it applies mostly to monks, but lying is wiped out by the torture of superiors. So it seems like, I don't know, the monks that lied were maybe sent to that place that we talked about in step 2 or something.
What number is that, Ed?
Number 10.
Yeah, I didn't even know what that meant.
So lying is wiped out by torture of superiors is both, it's kind of double nuanced. On the one hand, yes, it's talking about the idea for monastics that liars are dealt with, you know, with punishment. But it also deals with us here is what is the greatest cure and salvific balm for a liar? To get caught. What happens when you get caught in your lie? Punishment. And sometimes that punishment is enough to keep you from lying again. When we're children and we lie and we possibly get spanked or put in timeout, that is a way of teaching us don't lie. There are consequences. And the problem is that people that lie often do so because they have not been caught. They have not been held accountable. And so when we are tortured, now the verbiage that he's using here, I don't think he means like literally tortured.
Punished.
Punished. But this is the thing, is that it's wiped out by that, but it'll come back unless it is actually destroyed by tears. In other words, actual
Remorse. Yeah.
It's similar to that concept of the boy that put his hands in the cookie jar and mother smacked him and he's crying. Well, why is he crying? Is he crying because he did something wrong, or is he crying because he got caught and his hand got smacked?
Yeah.
This is again kind of related to when Jesus Christ talks about casting out the demon of the house. Is that you can cast out the demon, but unless you've changed the house, the demon's going to come back with 7 more demons bigger than itself and make itself at home again. So yes, you can punish somebody for their lie, and it'll stop them from lying for a time. But unless that person is crying, weeping for their actual sin of the lie, then it's not destroyed, it's not rooted out. It can and probably will come back. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that one. So we need to feel remorse, right?
Exactly.
That's the way to really cure it.
Correct. The one is going to stop it temporarily.
Yeah.
You know, it's a fix.
For that particular lie.
Right.
But for lying in general, remorse would be a better.
Well, even for that particular lie, I mean, a person can say, well, I'll just lie better next time.
Yeah.
Don't get caught and punished.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't the lie. The problem was I wasn't lying good enough.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen is actual compunction, actual tears. That is what will cure the problem. To actually recognize this was wrong. Is Steve okay?
I think he's in another meeting.
Oh,
He
okay.
mentioned that he had some other meeting or something.
Okay. All right, then let's go ahead and move on to step 13, despondency. Pat, do you?
Excuse me, Father. Yes, on step 13, can you start us off by, because I see that they're using despondence in a different way than I or we might understand it. To be despondent is to just feel really hopeless and incredibly sad, but they seem to be using that word, or St. John does, I shouldn't say they, in a different way. And it's elaborated in the footnote 1.
Right, and really it kind of gets into this, we'll talk a little bit about too, regarding the noonday devil. basically this despondency is that feeling like, what's the point? Why even bother? Where, really matter if I stop now? Why go forward? I don't care. It can become just a lack of energy. It can become a lack of hope. It can be just all kinds of just, ugh, I just don't care anymore.
Like an apathy?
Yeah,
Okay.
where you become apathetic. You're just, I don't care. I'm done. So how did our brother interpret this in his letter?
Let's see, what does he say here? He says, we live in a world where being a Christian is not popular. I was raised with the foundational belief that the words of the prophet Jeremiah from 36:11 are true. God loves us and has plans for our future. The despot does not believe in God nor in the Lord. This could be due to some trauma or just the unbelief that there is a merciful and compassionate creator. This attitude and belief is the death of the church, because once a person is that far gone, there's no return. We must not fall into this trap, because the greatest lie the enemy has ever told has made the world believe that it doesn't exist.
Okay. I would say for him, this step is perhaps the most apropos because, and especially during COVID, as we've seen, is that community is its natural enemy. And actually, we'll get to the bottom of whether there really isn't a natural enemy of despondency. It's kind of a ubiquitous, horrific demon to deal with. It's very closely akin to sloth, but it's a very, very deadly sin that can affect people that are alone. So we'll go ahead and start again with Dr. Ed for broad strokes, and then after our broad strokes, we'll go into particulars.
Yeah, I think like Pat had kind of had a hard time pinning down a good definition of despondency. And so it seemed to be talking about different things and as you went along, but in the end, it seemed that the common cure, the recommended cure to those things that you were talking about, what's the point, lacking in energy, not knowing if it's worth it or not, is to stop thinking about it and just getting on with the business, with prayer, singing, psalmody, and manual labor, the things that he tells you to do. And I guess, I found that in my own life. The other day I didn't want to get out there and shovel the 14 inches of snow in the driveway, but once I got out there, it seemed to go all right.
That's exactly it, is that the devil of despondency is trying to tell you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And you're like, oh, this is going to stink. It's like working out, any kind of workout. And then once you've done it, you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did it. If I'd listened to that, I would have quit. I wouldn't have done it. Pat?
Are we picking a particular step that?
No, just broad strokes.
Oh. I don't know. I just felt like he wants us to be fighting despondency and not giving into it, to have the fortitude to plow ahead, even though you feel often that what's the point, or there's no point to it, that you still need to move ahead and try and get beyond that.
It really is a source of willpower that we're looking at here. And like Ed said, that the idea of, well, just force yourself through. And that's very, very hard, because the reality is you could say, oh, don't give despondency a threshold to stand on. But how do you control that when it is an emotional response that you don't actually control?
Yeah.
We're going to get into that a little bit deeper, but the idea that the evil one can very easily affect your mood and emotions. And so those are not necessarily to be trusted, especially in this case. To be able to force yourself to say, Just do it. And that's very, very hard when you are either suffering from a mental illness or extreme depression. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to get into a little bit about why there are certain tools in our kit to attack this, because this really is a extremely dangerous demon and can lead to very, very dark, horrible things. Mrs.
So would you liken it to depression, Father, in some ways?
Absolutely. It's acute depression that hits almost everybody. It's not confused with chronic depression, which is something that people have continuously. This is more of something that hits you and usually in time can be weaved off with basically just willing it away, as opposed to people that are dealing with chronic despondency, chronic depression, in which that attitude, that feeling never goes away. And you're feeling like you're dealing with that constantly, which can be a result of some psychological issues or a psychiatric issue in which the person needs to have basically chemicals to recalibrate the brain to work the appropriate levels because the brain is not working appropriately. Just as an aside, as a priest, I don't personally encourage people to take antidepressants just for the sake of antidepressants unless there is a chemical problem in the brain requiring it. I prefer patients and parishioners to go to psychologists and to work through psychological issues before they take that step.
Right. I think doctors today are really too quick to want to medicate away the depression without even understanding that, there's often a reason why you're depressed, and to try and deal with it, or as you say, to talk it through, not just to medicate it.
Well, and really good doctors, especially psychiatrists, will, of course, combine psychiatric therapy with psychological therapy, because especially if it is a chemical problem, essentially what you've done is you've given the person a new brain, and they need to learn how to use that new brain to actually do things with it, because otherwise you haven't really helped the person. All you've done is give them a new setting. Still need to learn coping mechanisms to help them through these things. But step 13 is focusing more on acute despondency rather than chronic. Now, granted, if you do not deal with the acute, it can develop into chronic, which is why this can be extremely dangerous and deadly. Mrs. Tobias?
Yeah, in broad strokes, but as I read all of this, I kept thinking, because they were reporting like with this COVID thing, and everybody, like, we haven't been out in what, month at least. Besides the snow, occasionally Kroger or something like that, but that I felt I was hearing news of people being basically despondent. They said they were lonely, they were having issues. And, and I think that, like one of the ones said something about that a hermit is more susceptible to despondency because he's by himself. He's, and I thought about everybody on COVID. Some people just can't deal with this, and at first I didn't understand, why are people lonely and depressed? I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm fat, dumb, and happy here with my dog and my husband, but I mean, but I understand now reading this about what's happening to people who are cooped up, and I think they are getting a bit of, despondency.
Correct. And even during the beginning of the pandemic, and I participated myself too, that I would call people and they were just so grateful for the call because they were just so lonely. And even now with the idea of loneliness, of like, we can talk to each other, we can FaceTime each other, but there's something to be said about actually physically being with somebody. I came to some shut-ins that told me that for 6 months, they didn't see their family, they didn't see anybody, they were alone in their house having food delivered to them, and they were just so lonely and depressed and sad, and they said to me, "Father, if I did not have my faith, I don't know what I would have done."
That's right. Exactly right. That's what I was thinking too. I feel bad. One of us had just said, we agreed about, about or faith. I mean, the need for faith and how that, if you don't have that, or if you think, oh, they don't, God doesn't exist. I think it was our letter from our friend, that people don't have faith, they don't believe. And if you don't believe, if you don't say prayers, if you don't, have, for us, icons around to remind us, I think you can fall into those pits.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Tobias, go ahead and give your broad stroke and then go immediately into one of the ones that you wanted to talk about.
Well, this one, I really had trouble following.
Yeah, this one was hard.
Just
Yeah.
because he would say some things
And then go back the other way.
and then go the other way, and then there were some passages that were almost contradictions to what he was saying, and it just left me totally confused.
Okay, can you give me an example of one that confused you?
Well, like in 11, he's then we're talking about the Psalms and everything, and then he says, when there is no psalmody, then despondency does not make its appearance. Well, and then the other ones, he's saying, well, if you're reciting the Psalms and everything, it should go away, but then part of it is when you're in the service and everything.
So when let's look at 11 a little deeper. Since despondency is one of the 8 capital vices, in other words, it is one of the mother sins, the biggest, deadliest sins, and moreover the gravest, and that's because this can lead to depression and the desire to end things, if you know what I mean. Let us deal with it just as we have dealt with the others, but let us only add this. And this is where things become even darker. When there is no psalmody, then despondency does not make its appearance. In other words, when you're not praying, especially for those that are trying their hardest to become, Christian, you don't sink into it. You don't get despondent. Because this level of despondency that he's talking about is spiritual despondency. The idea of what's the point of praying? And so what he's saying is that when there's no psalmody, despondency doesn't make its appearance. In other words, I'm not depressed. It's when I'm trying to pray that I start to get depressed and sad. And what's the point?
That is sort of confusing, Father, though.
And again, when he talked in another place where he said that it's, when you're trying to pray, you're sleepy, I can't do it. And then as soon as the appointed office is done, what does it say? The eyes are open. Now I'm wide awake. Which is to say that the reason that you were feeling drowsy, the reason you were feeling depressed, is because the evil one can manipulate your emotions and your body to make you drowsy when you're trying to pray, to make you not want to do things when you're praying, to try to basically give you thoughts, all kind. There's another section, and I don't want to necessarily take it if it's one of the ones that you want to talk about, where every other thought will hit you when you're trying to pray except focusing on the prayer. And that is what the demon of despondency tries to do, rob you of that.
Is that what he's saying in number 13?
Observe, and you will find that if you stand on your feet, despondency will battle with you. If you sit, it will suggest that it is better for you to lean back. And it urges you to lean up against the wall of the cell. Then it persuades you to peep out of the window by producing noises and footsteps.
What is he saying there?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So the evil one, because this is a demon, we have to understand not just an emotional response. This is an active combatant against you. Despondency will try to distract you out of your prayers, to say, what's the point? Try to think of anything to get praying. So it's like, oh, I'm tired, I should sit.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm tired, I should lean back. Or, oh, I hear noises outside,
I better go
I
check
should see
on it.
who it is.
Yeah.
So, for example, when we've read Elder Thaddeus, he talked about how once when he was trying to pray, he heard tanks and a battalion of soldiers rushing towards him. And he knew it was not a battalion of soldiers and tanks rushing towards him. It was demons trying to stop him from doing his prayers.
Well,
So the reality is that the enemy, we talked about this before, is that when you're walking with the devil, he's not necessarily going to try to stop you. It's when you're actively going against him, when you are fighting the enemy, that is when he's going to try to attack you with your emotions, with your body. And that's why you are having to basically do, just like Dr. Ed said, keep going, fight, stand up. And that's one of the reasons why in other places it says community fights this, because how do we fight a lot of times despondency? Encouragement. And that's why when you're alone it's hard, because who's encouraging you? You are having encouragement from the saints and your angels, but you might not be aware of it because your body and your emotions are being toyed with.
Father,
Yes.
is that why, like I've heard many priests say this, like people have no problem. You got to get up at work, you're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, to get ready to go to work, no problem. But it's like like, oh my gosh, so tired, have to go to church, and you drag yourself up and you go. Is that because people are just being pulled?
Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't so much put it as work as much as that 4 o'clock fishing trip.
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember when I was a lay assistant at St. Ignatius, they had an annual basketball tournament that would go to Detroit. And in order to go to it, everyone had to get up and be at the church to get on the buses by like 4:30 in the morning. Guess what? Everyone was there with bells on, wide awake, excited. Is it any wonder, have you ever wondered this, why every other day of the week you don't have a problem getting up, but on days when there's liturgy, suddenly you're dragging. You're struggling to wake up. You're struggling to get going. Why do you think that is? This is the demon of despondency, which is, again, related to sloth. And it is one of the gravest. Does that kind of answer your question, Dr. Tobias?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Mrs. Tobias, which is one of the ones that you wanted to look at?
Let me find it real quick here. One of the ones I had questions and understood, number 6, because it more or less sounded in 6 that, well, we go to visit the sick. That's part of, church, we all, if we're up on that ministry. And you think, should I be double thinking why I volunteered to do this? Or, I have to tell you when, and I'm on that mission with Vespino, but whenever I visit someone in the homes and who are either sick or in the home, assisted living type things, I always feel better when I leave. Person is excited to see us, but I always feel better when I leave. And I'm thinking, like, I hope I'm not going down that path where he said, which was sort of confusing to me.
Well, keep in mind, how is it? Read the last section of that. She puts into her heads to go out visiting the dejected and faint-hearted, and sets one faint-hearted to comfort another. In other words, you're not doing good, and so you're going to try to help somebody that's dealing with an issue, and you're not equipped to do it. So you're basically fooling yourself into saying, well, I'm not praying, but I'm doing stuff.
Well, it was related to the Bible, though, Father. It said that we think of what, I was sick and you visited me, and I'm thinking, like,
correct.
Well, wait a minute.
This is the thing, and this is why the evil and devil is so pernicious and dangerous, is because he's using scripture against us. Yes, you do need to do those things, but not at the expense of prayer, not at the expense of your soul. This goes again to when Jesus Christ was talking about the whitewashed tombs. Yeah, they look great, but what's inside them? Dead men's bones. So the question is, what are you bringing to another person? If you are going just to busy yourself about and just say, I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to pray because I'm going to go do stuff. Well, but what are you bringing to that person? Are you going to bring that person hope and help? What he's more referring to is people that go and visit and then gossip about other people,
Oh,
their own dejection and anger to the other person. So, yes, they visited somebody, but they didn't help them. They just kept them company and complained about their life and other things, as opposed to bringing comfort, care, and love. And especially, if we look to, for example, Pat's and Steve's ministry of prison ministry, one of the things that's very, very important within that ministry is giving hope to somebody that feels unloved and unwanted. That is not an opportunity for you to shoot the breeze and talk about your issues.
Right.
You are supposed to be ministering to that person. Does that make sense?
So often I'm at a loss for words as to what to say to them.
And so what happens? You're at a loss. And that's spiritual that you're at a loss. That sounds. So what do you do when you're at a loss? Right?
I do. Sometimes I avoid writing.
Right.
I say, well, I have to wait till I can think of what to say to make them feel better. But
Right. You're praying, you're waiting, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it.
yeah,
That's not going to help that person.
no,
Does that make more sense?
yeah.
All right, Pat.
Well, I'm kind of doing the opposite of Dr. Tobias in this one, in that I looked at number 16, which at first I was really wrestling with, but then I read it over and over again, and I saw that he's enumerating the things that nurture or mother despondency, and then the offspring of despondency. I thought that was really brilliant. Insensibility of the soul, forgetfulness of the things above, excessive troubles. And then my offspring.
Changing from place to place. How many times have people joined churches because they say, oh, this place isn't like the place that I was at? And
Right.
invariably, what's going to happen? Because you're away from place to place, that place now is not going to be good enough.
Right.
Opposed to running towards, you're running away from. This is a very dangerous, dangerous demon.
I can understand what Pat's saying, but when it says the one area we talked about remembrance of death, and how he's saying my enemy is the thought of death.
Yes, despondency is the thought of death. In other words, judgment. My enemy is the person that is conscious of his judgment. And what completely mortifies me is prayer with firm hope of future blessings. Hope in something greater. Actual hope. And I love his little play on words here. And who gave birth to prayer? Ask her.
What does he mean by that?
Yeah.
I interpret that to mean the Theotokos. And
Okay.
we're struggling in our lives. Who often do we turn to most?
Well, that's true.
Blessed Virgin.
Our mediatrix, the one that helps
Yeah.
us most in our prayers to her son.
That's why Father's here, right? For the Theotokos.
All right.
Yeah.
Dr. Ed, you are going to close us out with marvelous wisdom.
Well, there is no marvelous wisdom to come here. But yeah, well, the one I really liked was, and I think you just touched on it, number 15 is how to bind this tyrant. Let him be bound by the remembrance of your sins. Let him buffet him with manual labor and brought into court by the thought of blessings to come. So that's the idea of the hope that you were talking about. But I want to ask you, and it's still not clear to me after all of this discussion, how despondency is one of the children of talkativeness And in being a child of this sin, it is also one of the capital sins. So it just seems like in the hierarchy of sins, like you should have those big ones, and then the capital sin should have a bunch of children. In this case, he's talking about how despondency is a child of talkativeness, and yet it's one of the capital sins.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Let's see. Is that one of the top first lines that it says? I'm trying to see where it says that this is. Oh, there it is. As we frequently said, this, we mean despondency, is very often one of the branches of talkativeness as its first child, as we have given it appropriate place in its chain of life. In other words, what talkativeness does is distract us, pulls us away. So despondency's chief goal is to pull you away from the focus of what you are doing. To focus on yourself, to focus on your cares, to focus on basically anything other than what you're trying to do. And talkativeness is deadly in that regard because it pulls us to different things. It keeps us unattentive. Because when we're jabbing away, we're not thinking.
Yeah. There's something very slippery about this one because there's another one here, number 9, where he seems to be suggesting, each of the other passions is destroyed by some particular virtue, but despondency for the monk is a general death. So it seems like there's an obvious sort of virtue to counter most of the other passions, but this one, it seems a lot fuzzier to kind of put a finger on.
So what it is basically with most of the other passions, you can focus on its counterpoint to try to basically win over it. Whereas, and once you've acquired the virtue, you are basically stellar. Whereas despondency does not have a counterpoint. It just exists and you have to fight it. And so that's why it's a general death for the monk, because there is nothing that you can focus on that's going to make it magically go away, where suddenly it is transformed into something else, where anger can be transformed to something. Their hunger can be transformed into something. You can't transform despondency into something good. It's the lack of anything good. It's the lack of focus. It's the lack of direction. It's the lack of will. And so it basically makes you ask yourself, what is the point? And talkativeness gets us there because when we're gabbing and talking, we're not focused on what we should be focusing on. And so this leads us to wonder, okay, what's the point? And especially those that are talking, they're more aware sometimes of the fact that I don't know anything. And people are wrapped in my every word, but the reality is, what am I actually even saying? What's the point? Have you ever wondered why some of these people that seem to be the greatest speakers are also struggling with some of the greatest depression?
Father, like sometimes you think, I always think this, you see somebody that's so depressed and, they have everything. They've got loads of money. They're successful, performers or actors. And yet, they either commit suicide or they're despondent. They go into hospitals and they have, mental breakdowns. And you think, well, sometimes you think, man, if I had this or I had that, more than money, they have all this money. How can they be this way?
Because money's not going to fix despondency. Now, my brothers and sisters in Christ, let us hope that this dark demon does not prevail over any of us. Let us focus on spiritual virtues that combat it, particularly our remembrance of death, and most importantly, the hope and the reason why we do it, the hope of something better, the hope of the rewards of being in the kingdom with our Lord, the hope of the redemption of all of our family. I pray everyone has a good night. I pray that those of us that are dealing with snow and broken water mains can get some help speedily and readily. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Next week, we will again have a couple more chapters because they're not... Actually,
So 14 and 15?
I think that's what I have on the calendar. 14. 14's pretty long, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's just going to be. Yeah, 14, 15.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Have a blessed and wonderful night.
You too, Father. Mrs. Tobias, where's Daisy?
What's that?